We're obviously very lucky to have House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy with us today. Good turnout in the audience on a rainy,
good morning,
rainy day in the lame duck session.
If they feel tired, I just flew in from California last night.
And there's a lot going on. The lame duck, I guess, isn't going to be as exciting as it possibly could have been, but next year is going to be very big. Let's start with the news overnight. Tom Price, a congressman from Georgia, who you serve with, is going to be the Health and Human Services Secretary. He's been a staunch opponent of the Affordable Care Act. What's your relationship like with Price? What do you make of Trump picking him?
Tom and I couldn't be closer. Tom's chairman of Budget Committee. He serves on Ways and Means. He's a doctor, orthopedic surgeon. He's been integral in the Republican putting together a better way of how to repeal and replace Obamacare. So I actually believe this is a very good decision on Trump's part. I thought this would happen early on, that Tom would be a perfect fit, and which is nice. We've got Mike Pompeo going to CIA. We got Tom Price within there. I mean, I talked to the administration-elect almost every other night, and I tell them, how many are you going to take from all this? No, you got to leave some people left, but no, there's a lot of good people that have been working hard on these issues that is going to make it, in my perspective, easier to get the job done.
And who are you talking to in the administration? Is that Mike Pence? Is that?
Well, I talked to President-elect Donald Trump. I talked to Reince. I talked to Bannon. I talked to Mike Pence. So yeah.
And are they eager to sort of work together, have collaborative?
I really feel everybody feels very close about working together. And one thing I'm going to do, I think I've been on a couple morning shows, and sometimes my mouth says something that my head's thinking differently. So I think I said today that I was putting the calendar out today. I'm not. I thought it was Wednesday. I'm putting the calendar out on Wednesday. And I've been redoing the calendar, one of the roles as the majority leader, especially for the first 100 days and for this year. And it's not just the idea of, oh, what day should we be in session? No, it's in concert with working with the new administration and working with the Senate. What would we be doing that week, the next week, and the other week? Now, the House works faster than the Senate, time-wise. We don't have this gridlock of 60-vote world. So our movement will be faster, but planning out one of the roles of majority leader, too, is managing the committee. So seeing what we can do, what we should be doing at this time, and mapping all that out. Knowing things change, and you have to be flexible, but you're never going to get all this done if we don't start working early. So we'll come in early on the 3rd.
2 weeks before, I guess 2.5 weeks before he gets sworn in.
Yeah.
Are there going to be more legislative days next year than
we'll be in session,
years?
More legislative days. I'll explain that all to the members, and we'll walk them through it when I give it to everybody else. But I will tell you, the members are eager about that.
Right.
The weeks will be longer. The first 100 days will be more. There's certain times I wish we could be in, like the 1 week right before the inaugural. Security-wise, you can't use the Capitol during a couple of that times. We've got a couple retreats, the Democrats and Republican retreat. I do think those are helpful, though. Ours are done with the Senate as well, so to me that's still working in the process, but I just don't have floor time during those days.
So let's talk about the first 100 days. You're mapping out your calendar. What is the benchmark for success in the first 100 days? If we came back 100 days after Trump is sworn in, what's success?
Well, I'd like to see progress. First thing you're going to find at the very beginning, what I've found in this past administration, the frustration with the country, is the lack of growth. One of the elements happen to be, especially if you look at the economic news, productivity is down in America, 3 straight quarters. And that's because you're hiring new people just to deal with regulation. We no longer have co-equal branches. I think reorganizing where we have co-equal branches, bringing that Article 1 back, you're going to see at the very beginning, REINS Act, the Midnight Rule, others going through. We have some elements of certain things that we can do from the prospect of a check and balance. We have a Congressional Review Act that allows a different vote number in the Senate based upon regulations that have passed. If you take the first 6 years of the Obama administration, it was almost 500 new regulations through. So how do we rein that back in, doing congressional review acts. Those take 15 legislative days to be privileged in the Senate, so you really can't start on that until the 24th. We had not done a budget for 2017. You'll see a budget probably start in the Senate. As many of you know from being here, that gives you reconciliation. So that is an element of how do you deal with the deficit. That's one of the elements that you can deal with Obamacare in the repeal of it. You can't replace it under that, but you could start the process to repeal. You'll also have a budget for 2018. And that gives you another bite of the apple in reconciliation when you want to do tax reform, if you want to do tax reform that way. When it comes to the border, the administration and others want us to get that done quickly. You'll see movement on that. You'll see talk when it comes to infrastructure. We're looking at ways that we make this economy start working again. I know there's administration you have to fill. That's going to take part-time, the Senate. The Supreme Court, they'll have an appointment that they're going to have to fill within there. But we've got to get work being done, and we can't waste any of the weeks and the times. VA needs reform. So all these things we have been working on, and a lot of those we've been working on in a better way ahead of time. So you've got a lot of that work through committees done, and once January 3rd comes, you finish populating. We're in a stronger position in the House than probably all the others. I mean, the Democrats haven't even picked their leadership yet, and if there's one person I can root for, I think Nancy has more support in the Republican conference for her to stay leader than maybe in her own conference. I'm not sure, but I'm just seeing if you're awake, okay?
Get some love. Yeah, you said last week that you feel Republicans will have the House majority as long as Nancy Pelosi is Democratic leader.
Oh, I firmly believe that. Don't you notice how there's some people in the Senate that always stay one term too long? And a term in the Senate's like 6 years. I kind of feel like Nancy's at that point, but I want to help her. I think that's a good place for her to be, and I think it's very helpful for
the NRCC
majority.
Endorsed her.
Yeah. Can you believe she puts out that she wants to keep the current DCCC? I would look at about firing what those people did in that last election, but she wants to keep them. More power to her. She should be reelected.
I want to talk about the issues, but while we're on this point,
yes,
you were part of the kind of integral. You were in charge of recruiting in that 2010 class that won the House majority. You were one of the young guns. If you were giving advice to young Democrats, the young guns in that caucus right now, besides the Pelosi point, what would you tell them? How do you come back from being in the wilderness? This is the first time you got elected in 2006.
Well,
you arrived in Washington.
The country has already decided your policies are not where they want to go. They rejected your majority, but you kept the same leadership. And then their leadership, no disrespect, but their leadership is 75 to 76 years old. That's not the future. When you look at what we did recruiting, you got to stop Washington from recruiting. What I did, I went across the country, and you don't want to talk somebody into running, you want to ask them why they want to. And then if they have the right reasons that they want to, you want to enhance that, but you don't want to pre-pick. You want the competition to come from within and represent their own area. And we always put measurements, so people had measurements of where to get, and in that year of 2010, we defeated 63 Democrat incumbents, and 61 of them were young gun candidates. The story I always love to tell, I'll finish with this one. Stephen Fincher. So I go out and I'm recruiting, and Barack Obama at the time is 70% approval rating. And I sit down with Stephen Fincher, and he tells me he's from Frog Jump, Tennessee. And I ask him, I said, well, why do you want to run? He says, well, Mr. Kevin, I'm just a farmer, and I'm watching the country change before my eyes, and I don't know how I tell my children that I did nothing. I said, well, that's a good reason. He goes, oh, but Mr. Kevin, I don't know if I'm the best person. I said, why? He says, well, I've never been elected to anything. I said, that's all right. It's anti-incumbent. You don't have to be elected. Oh, Mr. Kevin, I've never even been to Washington, D.C. on vacation. I said, as of right now, you're my top recruit in the nation. And you know, he announced he was going to run. I came back to my conference, and I said, I think I found a person that defines this election. And they all kind of laughed at me. I said, here he is. having never been to D.C., having never run before, but is willing to risk all of his finances, all of his life, because he watched his country changing. That it had frustrated him that far that he was willing to do it. And truthfully, a lot of the media laughed at me, right? And so once he got in, the Democrat opponent stayed in and then backed out. Then these other people got in with millions of dollars. Stephen Fincher won. And you know what? When you looked at in Congress, he's retiring right now. He's been there 3 terms. The first year, the Jobs Act, which people say was one of the best bills, you know who the author of that was? Stephen Fincher.
Let's unpack some of the issues. When we asked about the first 100 days, you mentioned several kind of big ticket things. Let's start with Obamacare. We sort of mentioned it with Tom Price. You mentioned backstage you're putting something together for
yes.
the next couple days.
Okay. We'll repeal Obamacare. It's the replacing of Obamacare. You want to make sure it gets right. One thing I've always found, the argument was you need to change the health care system. Obamacare will not stand on its own. I mean, you look at, what was it, 23 co-ops when they passed Obamacare. What were they given? $3 billion. Now 16 of them have failed. Premiums are up 25%. You go through all the ramifications, people leaving the market. A lot of states only have 1 options in there. We never thought that would succeed. But repealing it, you want to make sure you replace it properly. And this is a problem when I think when they went, they closed ranks and they didn't listen to anybody. They made it a political decision instead of a policy decision. Now, we've done a lot of work on this, especially when it came to King Burwell, when we thought there was going to be a Supreme Court case, right? Well, there was a Supreme Court case, but the decision was going to do differently. And we put a little group together to map out where we would go. And at the time, it was the chairman of Ways and Means, Paul Ryan. It was Tom Price, myself. But the other thing that we did, we brought governors in. Listen to governors. Do you have ideas too? And what we thought would work at the very beginning is not where we finally ended up, because we sat there and talked policy, because we make policy in the world of politics. So what's the best policy you can get through and make happen to work the process? So what I'm going to do, I'm putting letters out this week to all the governors and the insurance commissioners. Give me your ideas too on replacement. We want to make sure we get this done right. We're going to get it done, but we want to make sure it's done right and people are engaged in the process as well.
When do you think it gets done?
Well, repealing is easier and faster because that could be a 51 vote. Replacing is going to be 60 votes. So I don't want to set a time limit that this has to get done by this certain date. I want to make sure it gets done right.
To get to 60, what do you envision? There are obviously a bunch of things in the law that are pretty popular, some of which aren't that expensive, but some of which are.
Well, the first thing everybody talks about, pre-existing conditions and your children 26. Where did those ideas stem from? Those were actually Republican policies.
So is
when
the
we talked
individual
about
mandate.
healthcare. Well, different places. So, but in those 2 instances, I believe those stay. But we've got an idea in a better way. That's one place to start. It's not easy, because I've sat around the room many times trying to come up with the replacement plan. It wasn't until King Burwell that it forced us to start making decisions. And I think that's going to be very helpful. But I also want to have the states out there, because I think having more competition, having options for people, I always use the analogy, when I want to pick a cable company or to watch what I want to watch on TV, I love the options that I have. I love the ability to switch. I love the different packages that I can pick if I like a certain sports team or I want to watch HBO or something else. I can make it just tailored to myself. Why can't we have health care in a manner that we could do something to that extent? And I think that'll be a much better option.
Immigration.
Yes.
You mentioned the new administration, it's a high priority to do something about the border. What does that look like? Is that the wall? Is that going to happen?
You're going to have to secure the border no matter what you do. And yes, this administration cares about it, but I would say that's a bipartisan issue. When you looked at what I would say the Democrat plan was in the Senate, when they did their bill, they put billions of dollars for border security. You've got to have a secure border. And I think you'll see people that work on that. Now, there can't be anybody in this room who thinks our current immigration system works. It doesn't matter what position you are about immigration, but if you believe the current system works, you're wrong. And if we do nothing on immigration, we perpetuate the problem. 40% of everybody that's here illegally came here legally on a visa. So don't you think that program needs to be changed? But the process and the idea that if somebody comes here and they get an engineering degree and we tell them to leave, but we do this just luck of the lottery and it's chain migration where you bring your whole family in. I don't think that's a system that's working right in America. Look, we are a country that assimilates, that believes in immigration. I think we got to have greater control over what that means and how the process is that we do it.
Do you sense that there would be any appetite for some kind of larger comprehensive reform beyond just the
I don't
border
think
package?
you can. I believe there is, but I do not believe there's any trust to do any comprehensive immigration reform without proving you secured the border first. I think there's a lack of trust out there, and no matter what you look at from immigration, people believe you have to start with that. And so let's start with that and then move from there.
You have a lot of relationships in Silicon Valley. You're sort of the main Republican point man out there. Immigration is...
I got Peter Thiel and a couple others.
Immigration is obviously important to them. They care about some of these visa issues that you just mentioned.
Yeah, H-1Bs and others.
How important is the immigration component to what they want? And you talk a lot about your innovation agenda.
Well, I think it's very important there, but remember, where I come in California, I'm in a very diverse district. Cesar Chavez is buried in my district. So I also understand a guest workers program from the agriculture where I come from. I mean, 2 families in my district grow 80% of all the carrots in the country. You ever eat a baby carrot? You know those little ones? You want a secret? There's no such thing. They're regular carrots. We chop them, charge you more, you buy them, and we love you for it. So we don't charge you more, but that's what we do. Silicon Valley as well, H-1Bs. We're sending people off. We want an economy that grows. We want people that want to assimilate, want to be part of America and come, and I think we could find an immigration system that works that way.
I mean, there's some tension here within the Republican Party, of course. Someone like Jeff Sessions, he wants to reduce legal immigration. It's not just securing the border. There is some current of people who supported the current president-elect who want to reduce legal immigration. It sounds like you would have no appetite for that. You think that there is a place for legal immigration?
I think there's a big place for legal immigration. There's not one person in this room that can't trace their family back. You know, I'm Irish and Italian, so we have the best fights in the neighborhood, right? Guido Palladino came from Campalzo, Italy in 1921. That just so happens it's my grandfather, right? And then Jeremiah McCarthy came in the 1860s from Ireland. And they made a great contribution to this country. And you know what? One of their grandchildren became a majority leader in the House of Representatives. We want to keep that dream alive. And I believe we can keep that dream alive, but we also have to secure our borders. And there's a logical way we can go about this, that we maintain this, and we maintain the core and tradition of America with also protecting. Because there's people on the other side that want to have nothing, and people just run in. Well, you cannot keep a country strong without the rule of law. So if you do not have a secure border and people are breaking the rule of law by coming into the country illegally, you will break down society. There's a value to being an American, and you want to keep that value. And you know what? People went through the process legally to make that happen, and we want to make a legal system that works.
Moving on to tax reform. Big ticket item. The president-elect has talked about tax cuts. Do you see any prospect for big tax reform in the coming year,
Yes.
the coming Congress? And what's that going to most likely end up looking like? What do you think sort of the elements of that we can expect there?
I would say Article 1, Section 7 of the Constitution says all tax reform starts in the House, so you know it starts in Ways and Means. We did not wait for January to start thinking about this. We've already started working on this. If you look at a better way, and you want to know, well, what would that structure be? It'll be simpler and it'll be fair. I think you'll end up with 3 rates, not 5. I think there'll be a reduction in rates. Well, how do you get the reduction in rates is kind of how you craft it from the process. If I look at across this country the frustration, the movement of what we saw in these last campaigns, why? The middle class were worth less today than we were 8 years ago. The number one thing we have to do is grow this economy. Every single budget that last administration sent to us had like a 3.5 or higher annual growth rate in their budget. But they never achieved that. We're dealing with 1.5% growth rate. You do not solve the problems. We cannot solve the challenges of America just by cutting government. We have to grow this economy. And tax reform, reg reform, those are the key elements of making this economy begin to grow. With all the things what people would say to try to scare you about having Donald Trump become president, well, you're finding they're not true. The market was going to drop. Remember, on that election night, where was the options? Some of our best November we ever had on the market, right? Why? Because we assume, if you look at the economic factors before, business investment was down, consumer consumption was up, productivity was down. Well, the key factors behind that, if we could get business investment up, where they know they can get a return, or it's a good place to make an investment, productivity up, more people working, tax reform. Right now, we have a system where structure dictates behavior. You have a benefit to have a foreign country come by or leave this country. We punish you to bring that money back to America. It's all backwards. I've had some of my best friends who've created companies, started from scratch here, had to sell or somebody took them over, simply because our tax advantage was a disadvantage.
Do you think that Republicans have been very nervous about deficits the last 8 years? They weren't as nervous when George W. Bush was president. A lot of your members who've come in the last 8 years do put a high priority on deficit spending.
I'm one of them.
I mean, you can do dynamic scoring. You mentioned the administration's budget came in with sort of high expectations of growth. How serious are House Republicans going to take deficit spending?
We're very serious about it. And look, you cannot have a debt equal to your size of your economy. Every great society has collapsed based upon when they overstretch themselves. You could manage debt, but it's different. The size of the manage of the debt that I have on my home is one I can manage. It's, you know, I still live in the very first home I ever bought. Instead of buying $1 million house, I couldn't manage that amount of debt. So we have to look at that. And how do we solve this problem? Is what I talked about earlier. One, you have to grow the economy. You got to manage. One, we were very successful in 2010 where we put the caps on discretionary spending. It's mandatory spending. Discretionary is 10.67, right? $1 trillion in essence. But Medicare, Social Security, interest on the debt, that's making up 66% of the budget on its way to 75. During Ronald Reagan's term, that was 25%, and discretionary was 75. So we've got to get a handle on mandatory. We've got to grow the economy to get us out of this problem. That's why tax reform is so important. That's why regulation reform is so important.
How important, when you're moving bills out of the House, is it that they will be revenue neutral? Or, you know, one of the things that we're talking about is an infrastructure spending package that would be potentially hundreds of billions of dollars. That would be very hard to
and you want it to be paid for. But I mean, these come to different principles and philosophies, right? Is somebody a Keynesian or not? I believe if government lowers taxes, someone can go out and score and say we're going to get less. But what are you going to do with that money? You're going to invest it, grow it, and make it go faster than government? My belief is yes. So we're going to get more revenue in, and history has proven me right. So it's way you want to look at it. But when you're going into an infrastructure, you want to be able to pay for things. But another key element of infrastructure we're going to find in our conference is we're frustrated. We put in a long-term highway bill that you haven't had in quite some time. But some of the things we did was the reforms in it. Why does it take 10 years to build a road that you voted for a decade ago? Because population doesn't stop growing, and it moves right by it. Can't we bring common sense reforms where we can streamline the building of that road and others? I mean, let's be able to have the benefit of it at the same time. You're gonna find a lot of streamlining.
So as part of this infrastructure package,
yes.
Do you think an infrastructure thing can get done in the first 100 days? Is that, or is it going to take?
Look, I'm not going to put any timelines on us in the first 100 days. I want to get results, and I want to get it done right. I put more days in so we get this done. I think there's always a window. We know in an election year things are harder than the first year. We want to get as much done correctly as soon as we can, and there's an order and basis to do it.
Do you feel like, obviously you weren't around as much during the previous Republican administration, but do you, I guess you were
No, I came in the minority.
Right.
I came in the smallest Republican class in the history. There's only 13 of us, and not one of them beat a Democrat.
That's amazing. 2006.
That's right.
Do you feel like House Republicans are getting to sort of set this agenda, or are you, to what extent, you're obviously in touch?
We all work together. I think the House has a greater working majority. I think the House, by creating a better way, is better prepared for some of the issues that we're going to deal with. The Senate has some odd rules. I mean, I think the 60 vote is a guaranteed gridlock rule, but I also look at Democrats who are sit-in states that Donald Trump carried that will probably be more helpful in this perspective. Schumer will be new than Harry Reid. Maybe Schumer's more likely to work with negotiate on something. Our committees are up and better prepared.
Yeah, on this bipartisanship point, you mentioned obviously there are these red state Democrats, Indiana, Missouri, North Dakota, West Virginia up in 2018. You said on the Obamacare replacement, you're going to need 60 in the Senate. What else do you think you can get Democratic votes on, not just in the Senate, but also in the House, of these things that we've been talking about?
House is a little different, but I've always found if you study history, the first 9 months that's like the length of a honeymoon a new president gets. I remember when I came in, there was a 6 and 06, and people would like 300 votes, but then it slides down. It depends what we're moving. If there's a big challenge right now, I mean, yeah, I think Nancy wins, but I think she's already lost the base of her conference, right? So they're going to be more willing and apt to realize that they're sitting in districts where a lot of their friends have lost and people voted for wanting to get this country moving again. I think tax reform. It'd be interesting to see how many of them will vote for repealing Obamacare. Once it's repealed, why wouldn't they be willing to vote for a replacement then, right? You have no other options, or you're just going to play politics with it. Reg reform. I think you're going to find quite a few that are coming from rural America and others that watched the administration put in where they took out total industries and they watched their own constituents lose their jobs. I think you're going to find quite a few that are willing.
Let's talk about governing, sort of bigger picture. You have very good relationships with everyone in your conference, sort of across the ideological spectrum. The House Freedom Caucus, there were 20 members or whatever the number was, and you were whip, and you were majority leader, right? Who kind of wouldn't vote for anything, even when it was a pretty good deal that had been negotiated, just because it was voting to raise the debt ceiling, or it was.
You could always make it a little better.
It was right. And how are those folks, because you know them very well, going to respond when a deal gets cut, to get to 60 or whatever, that's 70% good? Do you think that now that there is unified Republican control of the government, some of those guys are going to come along, or do you think you're still going to have a dozen, 24 members who just, are going to let perfect be the enemy of the good?
Do you know our conference?
What's the number?
We are a microcosm of society, so members are all different. I think structure dictates behavior. There was a perfect structure where you had a different party in the presidency. You had a Senate that was slower. You could do those things. And if you utilized the Freedom Caucus to do that, it made the House Republicans actually weaker, because then you had to negotiate with Nancy Pelosi. If we stuck together, then we're always stronger. I think you're going to see us sticking together more. I think there's less ability for the Freedom Caucus to do those types of things I'm sure those districts Donald Trump probably did the best in. It'd be hard for them to stand up if President-elect Trump is asking for this fundamental change and they're saying no to it. I think that's harder. So I think we're more united too.
Yeah, because of the election and.
Yeah, I think Speaker Ryan has done a great job uniting the conference, though.
The sequester. You have some military resources in your district. Obviously, the sequester's been hard on.
Well, the sequester part is difficult because that came from the Obama administration, and the challenge of it is, we should do our own work to work that out. But if you want to do something investment in the military, it means you got to go do all this other stuff domestically that maybe might not need it or not where the investment is. If we are able to be together, I think we solve all that. And we can be.
So could you see lifting the sequester or getting rid of it?
I think you're not going to lift the caps. You can talk about where you make the investment, right? If you've got enough money, you're going to invest and you're going to prioritize where you want to do it. In a sequester, you're not being able to prioritize. And I look at the fact that one of the roles, if you're elected, you should take the responsibility of where you should make the decisions of where to spend that money. I don't want to go in debt. I got only a certain amount of money, but I want to invest it in the right place. And I think that would solve some of the problems that we can do.
Let's talk about California, your home state. You are lucky to represent the most Republican district.
No, I'm not.
Was it? Who was
Duncan Hunter does.
California is one of the very few states where Hillary Clinton did better than Barack Obama. Why do you think that?
So if you talk all about this popular vote and electoral college vote, first of all, you cannot have an election where you determine the outcome one way and then argue after the election, well, you did better here. Like if the game of baseball is you have the most scores, you win, but I got the most home runs, it doesn't work, right? So, but if the game is played, I would have played it differently. She beat Donald Trump by 3 million votes. So if you take California out, Donald Trump won the popular vote in 49 states then, right? If you just take 49 together. So there's ways I can always make an argument one way or another, but if we elect our presidents by electoral college, whoever got to 270 is going to become the president. You can't argue the other ones around. California, we did not lose one congressional race, and the Democrats played very hard in it. We came very close to winning one against Ami Bera up in Sacramento with Scott Jones. That wasn't decided till last week. I still think California is a place that we could teach the rest of the nation how Republicans can win. I'll give you an example. The district next to mine is one that's 72% Hispanic district. David Valadao represents that district. David Valadao won by 57% of the vote in a year where Hillary Clinton did very well. So I think we have abilities to expand. I think we can teach the rest how to do it. And it's
on the popular vote question, just following up on that.
Yeah.
Donald Trump, one of the things he tweeted on Sunday was, he said he would have won the popular vote if not for millions of fraudulently cast ballots in California. You're from California, you know the state's politics. Any signs of fraudulent voting? Is that?
Look, this is the thing I'll say. The election's over. I'm not into this recount. I'm not into the other. We had the campaign. I think everybody was ready for the campaign to be over. We made our decision. Now let's go govern. What's interesting to me is all the arguments that were prior, would you respect the election or not? It's over. Let's govern. Let's move on.
But just to close the loop, you didn't see any signs of fraud in your home state or district?
I say let's govern. We have elected officials that carry this. County by county is different. I could go through every aspect. Do you allow an absentee ballot in one county to go and one not based upon that? Anyone can make any argument they want, and you can put a fact based upon that argument if you want. The election to me is over. I think the public wants us to govern now. The recount's not going to be any different as you go through, maybe a few votes one way or another that it goes, but it's only counting the votes that it has.
It is. I get what you're saying. The public does want to move forward. Most people don't care about this, but it's important for the legitimacy of the election that the American people believe that the votes were counted fairly, that there wasn't widespread fraudulence.
Yeah, so let's move on.
But was there?
I looked at the election. I saw the results come in. I trust them just as I trusted them in the past. You could trust but verify. I don't have a problem. I think it's time to govern.
Great. Moving on. Donald Trump, sort of the man, the leader. You got behind him in May. You agreed to be a delegate for him at a time when a lot of Republicans here around town were not willing to do so. You kind of helped in a lot of ways.
That was pretty smart, wasn't it?
You read the tea leaves, whatever.
No.
Now he's president. He's coming in. We talked a lot about the policy agenda. There are some conservatives who are a little bit worried about some things about him. Kind of touching on a couple of the issues that have come up a lot the last few weeks. The potential conflicts of interest. The fact that he's not sort of following the traditions that some other presidents have followed. Does that worry you at all? Does that bother you?
I don't feel that's fair. And let me tell you why. I see this on a micro level where there'll be somebody who runs for Congress who's never been elected before that's been a small business owner. And they're running because they want to change the country. They never think before they're going to run, oh, I'm going to have to change everything in my business, because they don't know. They haven't had to do any of that, right? And then when they get elected, then the ethics committee comes to them and says, you got to do this or this. And then they tell you to do a certain thing, then they change their mind the other way. They've never thought of that. They just want to go serve, right? We set the rules up to really punish you if you've been in business. Because we start with the idea that, well, you'll do something corrupt within there. I think the aspect that when he did Don McGahn, he took this very serious. Most of you probably know him. No one's going to tell me he's not one of the most ethical attorneys you've ever seen. He knows the law very well. I think by naming him one of the very first, he'll go work all that out. It's not the role, if I'm going to go run for president, it's laying out the agenda or worrying about what am I going to do with my business. All right, if I won, here's the legal counsel. I did well in business. I'll let the legal counsel figure out what legal thing I'm supposed to do and not do. And I think by appointing him kind of solves that answer.
Could you envision House Republicans doing oversight of a Trump presidency if some of these lines maybe did get blurred? Obviously, you trust Don.
Look, I would assume, take Donald Trump out of it, oversight committee is supposed to be oversight no matter who's in. It's not you only do oversight. I mean, the same thing for the appointment of the Attorney General and others. The same reason why my office looks across the Supreme Court and there's a blindfold on. This country has got to come together. We got to stop being red and blue states. We got to stop being, just because you're of one party or something else. Oversight is oversight. And I want oversight to hold me accountable too. So it's not based upon, is it Donald? It's based upon what is the role of your jobs, carry out your jobs, and put blinders on it.
You mentioned, I mean, the party is more unified. People sort of have gotten on board.
Winning helps do that.
We have to wrap up in the next 2 or 3 minutes. Taking a step back, you got the majority 6 years ago. If you could go back and talk to Kevin McCarthy in the end of November 2010, what advice would you give yourself? Now that you've
in 2010?
Now that you've been in the majority for 6 years, you've been around the track a few times.
I would have asked our members not to make expectations higher than you could actually achieve. I always believe surpass expectations. I think we told the American public certain things that we could do that we couldn't do. We should have brought the public along each step of the way. But I'll give you this. The Senate never would have been a Republican majority had the House not become a Republican majority. Because you would not have had Cory Gardner, you would not have had Cotton, you would not have had from Louisiana down, or Daines or others. I mean, you've watched where this country has trended. And if you watched where Republicans were when Barack Obama took over, from the number of governors, from the number of legislative seats and others, we have never been stronger. But we did not run to win a majority. We ran to change a country. So we should not miss this window of opportunity. So when you ask me about the number of days that am I going to judge? No, I'm going to judge on getting the policy right. I'm going to judge on having an honest and fair government too. So it's not, are you going to use your power to benefit one person of party or someone? No. I've watched that. I didn't like all that took place. So why don't we leave a legacy that brings us back to 3 co-equal branches, because that keeps people more honest and in check. The power rests with the people. And for everything that was said about this election, I don't care what side you were on, you should feel good about the country. Because the pundits were wrong and everybody else. So what does that tell you? Nobody controls this government but the people. If the people get frustrated, they could change direction, regardless what experts telling them is going to happen. To me, that's exciting. And I'm excited, and I feel very honored to be able to walk into that building and be a small part of it. And, let's let history write for this window, for this moment in time. Did we achieve what we said to the public we would achieve?
Well, Kevin McCarthy, House Majority Leader, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who came, and thank you to everyone in our television audience watching online and on C-SPAN.